They transported cranes from 3 separate states, steel cables as thick as a person's arm, and 24 men capable of moving monuments twice as large. Yet, after 70 years, the statue of Our Lady on Rosary Hill remained immovable. Not a single inch budged. Some believe it is a divine wonder, while others consider it a curse. Positioned atop the highest point of St. Mary's Creek in Kentucky, a quiet, unnoticed town surrounded by gently rolling fields and maple-lined country roads, the white marble image of the Virgin Mary is visible from miles away. Her arms are open, her gaze lowered, as if she has watched over the town through every sunrise and storm since she arrived. To the residents, she is far beyond just a statue. She acts as a guardian, a vow etched in stone. They have brought their joys, sorrows, newborn children, and moments of farewell to her feet. Over generations they have shared one silent truth. No one touches the Lady on the Hill. No one can recall with certainty who placed her there, not in the same way. To elderly Martha Gray, it was the Irish immigrant family who returned from the war with nothing but faith and a promise to God. For Pastor James, it was the parish priest, from a time when the town held Mass daily and every man in the county donned a suit for church. Meanwhile, to the teenagers who sneak up there on warm summer nights, she has simply always existed, much like the hill itself. Yet these varied tales all point toward the same conviction. The Lady chose this very place, and she will remain. Then, the new ideas began to surface. The polished brochures, the city council meetings held in secrecy. The plan carried a refined title, St. Mary's Spiritual Retreat and Resort. The dream was to introduce faith-centered tourism to a town struggling to survive. Hidden in tiny print, almost overlooked by many, was a brief note. Move the current statue to make way for a new access road. The news began quietly in murmurs at Tony's diner over cups of black coffee. By the end of the week, every small business on Main Street was buzzing. By the weekend, Father Brandon could not celebrate Mass without noticing the uneasy, searching looks from his congregation. Half of the community saw it as an opportunity to rise above years of economic hardship. The other half was gripped by a chilling unease, the kind that defies full explanation. The feeling you get when something sacred faces irreversible change. Then tales started to circulate. First was the architecture student sent to measure the statue's base who claimed to have dreamed the statue toppled, not onto the earth but onto his own design plans. Following that, a builder from Cincinnati stumbled on the very first step leading up to the statue and fractured his wrist despite the stone being completely dry. After that came whispers concerning a bell. Some locals insisted they heard the toll of an old church bell, deep and slow, though no bell had ever existed on Rosary Hill. By the time the initial crane appeared in town, a quiet gathering had formed at the foot of the hill. They did not carry banners or raise their voices. They simply stood there. They stood with hands buried in pockets, eyes locked skyward. Some whispered prayers beneath their breath. Others fixed their stares on the statue as if challenging it to move. Even those who supported the resort's construction felt a chill of doubt. Talking about relocating the statue was one thing, but witnessing men fasten cold metal hooks onto her shoulders was another entirely. That morning, the wind blew from the east, carrying the smell of rain that never arrived. Somewhere amid the crowd, Martha Gray made the sign of the cross and softly said the same words she had repeated for 70 years. Ever since she had placed a chipped limestone fragment at the statue's base, she said, "If you save us, we will keep you here forever." Most people did not catch her words, but those who did would never forget them because what happened next transformed how this town and places far beyond viewed Rosary Hill forever. No one in St. Mary's Creek can agree on every detail of how the statue came to stand on Rosary Hill. Yet scraps of the story have been passed down through families, whispered in kitchens, retold at church gatherings, creating a legend that outlives those who first told it. The year was 1949. America was still recovering from the aftershocks of war. The town was smaller then, consisting of a few wooden houses, a solitary general store, a post office no bigger than a tool shed, and the old St. Brendan's Church resting at the hill's base. That winter, a storm unlike any seen in decades swept through Kentucky. Heavy rain, ice, and howling winds powerful enough to snap power poles in two devastated the area. On the third evening, the Ohio River rose to the brink of overflowing its banks, and the townspeople prepared for a flood that might destroy everything. Suddenly, without any warning, the wind changed direction. The storm's course altered, completely avoiding the hill. The floodwaters withdrew just as swiftly as they had appeared. Some believed it was mere chance. Others thought differently. Among them were Patrick O'Connor, a Pacific War veteran, and his wife Elaine. The storm struck on the very day they learned that their youngest son, once reported missing in action in Okinawa, was alive and on his way home. To them, this was no accident. It was a message. Elaine shared with her neighbors that evening while a pot of beef stew simmered on the stove. She said, "We owe her a promise. She saved our son, and she saved this town. We will keep her here where everyone can see her guarding us." By springtime, plans quietly began to take shape. There were no official permits, committees, or architects involved, just men with shovels and women bringing casseroles to support them. Children carried gravel buckets up the muddy path, slipping but laughing joyfully. The marble came from a quarry 2 counties away, a generous donation from a Catholic parish unable to complete its own renovation. An unemployed stonemason named Carlo Mancini, who had once carved saints for grand churches in Chicago, offered his skills for free. For weeks, he worked silently in an open-air shed at the bottom of the hill. His only companion was the sound of the chisel meeting stone. Locals whispered that he muttered prayers softly with each strike, though no one could catch the exact words. When the statue was complete, joyful, draped in flowing robes, eyes cast downward, arms extended, the whole town gathered to witness her placement atop the hill. It happened shortly after dawn. Men carried her broken into parts up the incline, assembling them carefully as if piecing together a holy puzzle. The base was filled with stones gifted by every family, each a fragment of their land, their home, their heritage. Hidden beneath those stones, Elaine O'Connor secretly tucked away a folded note inside the foundation. Its contents remained a mystery until decades passed, and weather and time faded the mortar enough to expose the edges of that paper. It read, "If you protect our town, we will keep you here forever." Over time, the woman on Rosary Hill became much more than mere stone and marble. She became woven into countless personal stories. Seniors visited the night before graduation, leaving corncobs and letters filled with hopes for their futures. Widows of the war found solace sitting on the stone steps when grief overwhelmed them. Farmers presented baskets of autumn harvests seeking blessings. Then there were the strange, inexplicable events. A lone candle burning through an entire January night without dripping wax. A hawk soaring around the hill for 3 whole days before vanishing. And a little girl who wandered away during a summer outing only to be found 2 hours later. Later, at the foot of the statue, safe, dry, and smiling, even though the searchers insisted they had thoroughly examined that very spot. Whether it was a miracle or simply a legend, the tales wove themselves into the identity of St. Mary's Creek. To such an extent that when outsiders started discussing relocating the statue, it felt less like a matter of city planning, and more like proposing to remove the town's own heart. Ask the older residents, and they will tell you, the lady has stood there longer than the streetlights, longer than the paved road leading into town, and even longer than some of the trees on the hill. The younger generation might just shrug, but watch them walk by the statue, and you will notice how they almost instinctively glance upward to make sure she remains in place. Because in St. Mary's Creek, faith is not always boldly proclaimed from the pulpit. Sometimes it is etched in stone, steadfast against the wind on a hill that refuses to let her go. It began quietly, much like most storms in small communities, behind doors the average citizen rarely crosses. In the brick City Hall on Main Street, under the flicker of fluorescent lights, the St. Mary's Creek City Council gathered for what was noted on the agenda as a special planning session. The public was not invited. Inside, a slideshow advanced through designs for a shining new undertaking, the town's spiritual retreat and resort. On the screens, Rosary Hill had been completely transformed. The dirt trail transformed into a paved driveway flanked by decorative cherry trees. A visitor center with glass walls stood at the peak. Near the parking area, on the property's edge, rested the statue of Our Lady, her white marble nearly shining beneath the artist's digital sunlight. For the first time in more than 70 years, someone in a position of authority had proposed relocating her. To the council and the development team, the idea made complete sense. It improved accessibility, visibility, and convenience for tour buses. To them, the lady was a historic artifact worth maintaining, just in a better location. Yet that single choice hidden in the fine print of a polished proposal, would ignite a spark like dry timber catching fire. The first person to learn about it was neither a council member nor a reporter. It was a part-time clerk at the planning office, a young mother named Lisa Torres, who noticed the relocation mention while reviewing documents for filing. She shared the news with her aunt over breakfast the next day. By nightfall, the information had spread halfway across town. At Tony's diner, the usual customers leaned over the counter to whisper. At the grain cooperative, elderly farmers paused their coffee break to shake their heads in disbelief. Nobody had anticipated it. Yet somehow, everyone had quietly feared the possibility. The responses divided, but not as outsiders might assume. Some viewed it as an opportunity. "This place is dying," grumbled Frank Dwyer, the auto shop owner, as he wiped his hands on a rag. A resort like that could create employment and revive the spirit of Main Street. Yet some felt a cold shiver run down their spine. "You move her, you move the blessing," said Ruth Kelly, who still climbed the hill every Friday carrying a bunch of lilies. "And when the blessing leaves, nothing good follows." By Sunday Mass, the division had become impossible to overlook. On one side of the church steps, younger couples discussed property values and the possibility of sending their children to better schools thanks to increased tax income. On the opposite side, older parishioners gripped their rosaries more tightly, their eyes searching the distant hill as if making sure the lady was still there. Father Brandon listened to both viewpoints but remained silent, although he stayed longer than usual at the altar rail after the service, his lips moving in a quiet prayer no one could hear. Then, there were the undecided ones, those unsure of what to believe but unable to shake the uneasy feeling that the town was venturing onto fragile ground. In the evenings, conversations spilled over into front yards and kitchen tables. A group of teenagers near the baseball field debated whether moving the statue would undo the charm, or if it was merely a rock. At the nursing home, Martha Gray, who had been present the day the lady was installed, told anyone willing to listen that promises made to heaven were not meant to be altered. The tension was not loud but quietly bubbling beneath the surface. At first, there were no rallies, no protest signs, just a subtle change in how people regarded each other across the grocery store aisles. Then appeared the initial act of resistance. One Tuesday evening, a handful of individuals, no more than 8, climbed Rosary Hill carrying candles. They knelt quietly at the base of the statue, their flames flickering gently in the breeze. They did not speak or shout slogans. They simply remained until the wax nearly melted away, then left silently. The following night, the number had doubled. Within 7 days, 30 people gathered on the hill, praying beneath the open sky. Yet, nobody described it as a demonstration. It felt more subdued, more resolute. Meanwhile, the developers dispatched surveyors, men dressed in polo shirts and baseball caps, equipped with clipboards and laser measuring devices. They strolled across the hillside, took pictures, and asked questions like, "When was this foundation set?" And, "Is there any proof of a permit for this structure?" Such inquiries stirred unease among the townsfolk. No one had ever needed authorization to pray before. During one of their visits, a surveyor approached Ruth Kelly, who still held her lilies. "Ma'am, do you happen to know if there is any record of how this statue came to be here?" he inquired. Ruth gave a faint smile. "Yes, the answer is carved in stone," she said quietly, and walked away. News of that conversation traveled almost as quickly as the announcement of the relocation itself. The town had now divided into 2 distinct groups. The first, mainly consisting of younger entrepreneurs and recent arrivals, insisted that change was unavoidable. That feeling by itself was not enough to sustain a town. The second, deeply connected to families who had lived there for many generations, believed that not everything valuable could be calculated in money. In the heart of all this, Rosary Hill remained untouched. The statue's gaze was fixed firmly on the village below, arms extended, face made of marble calm and composed, as if she had witnessed struggles like this before, and already understood how they would conclude. Yet beneath that calm, an unseen change was occurring, gentle as the breeze before a storm. A kind of change that makes people glance nervously behind them while walking alone, the kind that signals the next events will be far from ordinary. The first sign appeared to a man who did not put faith in omens. Tyler Grant was a final-year architecture student working as an intern for the development team. His task was straightforward: He needed to measure the statue's base, take photographs, and prepare a draft for the suggested relocation platform. On his second morning in St. Mary's Creek, he climbed Rosary Hill carrying a tablet in one hand and a half-drunk latte in the other. It was an ordinary day in mid-September, the sun warm with a few clouds drifting softly above. He crouched down, moved the laser measuring device along the pedestal's edge, and complained about the careless original craftsmanship. Later that night, in the motel room arranged by the developers, Tyler dreamed that the statue toppled forward, not breaking apart but falling as one solid, impossible chunk. It crashed. He fell directly onto the blueprints he had printed earlier that night, tearing the paper into fragments. When he awoke, the clock showed 3:33 a.m. The nightmare had left his shirt soaked with sweat, his chest feeling tight as though the air in the room had been thinner than necessary. By dawn, Tyler requested a transfer to a survey site in the downtown area. He did not offer any explanation for this sudden change. The second warning was more obvious. 2 days later, a contractor from Cincinnati named Bill Parsons arrived to evaluate the slope for placing equipment. Bill had spent 3 decades handling heavy lift projects, moving everything from Civil War cannons to granite memorial arches. At the hill's first level, where a wide limestone slab had been smoothed by years of weather, Bill's boot suddenly slipped out from beneath him. The stone was as dry as dust, yet he fell heavily, breaking his wrist. The foreman told reporters afterward that it was simply bad footing. However, witnesses insisted that at that very moment the air grew colder for a brief instant, and every bird in the nearby maple grove fell silent. Then came the bell. It was a Friday evening, still light enough to make out the contours of the western hills. Ruth Kelly was placing lilies at the base of the statue when she heard it. 3 slow, resonant tolls came from somewhere above her head. The sound was deep and metallic, lingering in the air longer than expected. She looked up, half expecting to spot someone holding a portable speaker to play a prank. But there was absolutely nothing. No bells, no tower. Only the vast sky and the faint scent of rain lingered, although no storm appeared anywhere nearby. By Sunday, 6 others claimed they had heard it as well, always occurring in sets of 3, always at twilight. The strange events continued to unfold. Father Brandon, usually reserved about sharing personal visions, revealed to a colleague in Louisville that he had awakened during the night to see a soft blue light moving slowly around the statue. It was not the shaky glow of a flashlight or phone. It floated calmly and in a circle, then disappeared when he approached the window. Teenagers who dared to climb the hill after dark returned silent and hesitant to speak. One boy eventually confessed that he had seen a woman in white standing several feet from the statue, her hair flowing in the breeze despite the still air. At the nursing home, Martha Gray, now too weak to climb the hill, told her nurse that the lady had closed her eyes in a repeated dream she had for 3 consecutive nights. Some of these stories could be dismissed, according to the developers. Optical illusions, vivid imaginations, the mind's desire to find patterns where none existed. Yet none of these explanations quelled the growing unrest spreading across St. Mary's Creek. The discomfort intensified when even the weather on the hill began acting strangely. On a surprisingly warm October afternoon, the survey team reported sudden blasts of freezing wind that shook their measurement rods and sent clipboards flying. Just about 50 yards down the incline, the atmosphere remained calm and warm. One morning, a young mother named Jaime Russell lifted her 2-year-old up the hill to place chrysanthemums in memory of her late grandfather. Halfway up, the child suddenly started to laugh and pointed toward the empty space beside the statue, saying, "Lady's hand." Jaime initially dismissed it, but then noticed that her son's small palm felt warm, as though someone had been holding it, even though the surrounding air was cool. That evening, she shared the experience with her husband, who passed it on to his brother, who in turn told 3 others at the bar. By the weekend, the tale had spread throughout the entire town. Despite all the whispers and cautions, the official schedule for the project remained unchanged. The developers insisted that moving forward would continue as planned. Local authorities suggested these stories were mere coincidences, but those working on the site began to feel uneasy. A crane operator named Gus, who had spent most of his career lifting bridge sections between states, confided to a friend at the hardware store that he had started suffering headaches every time he set foot on that hill. "Not regular headaches," he explained while rubbing his temple. "It feels like someone is standing right behind me, just staring." Even individuals eager for the project to proceed quietly admitted that perhaps risking whatever unseen forces were present might not be worth it. One evening, without any formal arrangement, nearly 40 townsfolk gathered at the base of the hill. Some held candles, creating a soft, flickering glow. Some stood silently with their hands tucked inside their coat pockets, gazing at the statue. Not a word was spoken, yet the stillness was so profound that the distant murmur of the creek nearly a half-mile away could be heard clearly. Then, faint but unmistakable, 3 slow bell tolls echoed down the hillside. One person gasped. Another whispered, "She is giving us a warning." No one stirred for almost a whole minute. When later questioned about what they believed the warning signified, the answers varied. Some thought they should not move her. Others feared something terrible would happen if they did. A few suggested it might already be too late to make a decision. Yet regardless of interpretation, the sentiment remained consistent in every response. The woman on Rosary Hill was no longer merely watching over the town. She was communicating without uttering a word. And the town, whether receptive or not, was beginning to heed her call. The initial effort began on a fresh Monday morning late in October. The sun climbed clear into the sky, the air stood still, and from a distance, Rosary Hill appeared unchanged, quiet and almost indifferent. However, at its base, the scene was far from ordinary. 2 flatbed trucks idled next to a crane towering as high as a 3-story building. Steel cables lay coiled like serpents on the ground. Workers in hard hats moved with the sharp efficiency of those who had handled this task countless times before. To the crew, it was simply another job. To the residents of St. Mary's Creek, it was the moment they had feared. By 8 o'clock in the morning, a modest crowd had gathered at the foot of the slope. No signs, no cheers, just the heavy weight of expectation. Voices were absent, leaving only silent observers. Some gripped their coffee mugs tightly while others clutched rosaries. A few stood quietly with arms crossed, expressions impossible to read. The foreman shouted commands. Thick cables were draped over shoulders and dragged up the hill. Workers carefully secured them around the statue's base, double-checking every knot. From a purely technical perspective, the task should have been straightforward. The marble weighed just below 2 tons, well within the crane's lifting limit. At 8:27, the crane's engine roared to life. The cable grew taut, the boom arm rose. Yet the statue did not budge. The operator frowned, eased the controls back, then applied more force. The steel strained, the tension meter climbed, and with a sharp crack, one of the primary cables snapped free, whipping onto the ground. A laborer staggered backward, narrowly avoiding a dangerous fall down the slope. The foreman swore, ordered the site to close for a thorough inspection, and assured the crowd they would resume work the following day. The second effort was carried out away from the public eye. Early Tuesday morning, just after dawn, the crew returned with heavier cables than before. They also brought a winch truck in addition to the crane. The strategy was to lift and gently pivot the statue onto a waiting flatbed. This time, only a small number of townsfolk who had caught wind of the unannounced work gathered. Once more, the cables were fastened securely, and the signal given. The winch motor rumbled. The crane tilted slightly forward under the load, but the statue remained firmly in place. The only thing that moved was the winch truck, its tires pressing into the ground by about an inch, as if something was resisting its pull. The operator shut off the power. A few workers shared uneasy looks, whispering about dead weight and unstable footing, even though the soil was dry and firm. By the third try, the developers were starting to lose patience. On Thursday morning, they returned with reinforcements. A second crane, a larger crew, and a lowboy trailer built to carry heavy loads. The new plan was to dig around the base, free the foundation, and then lift it. The backhoe began first, its bucket digging into the soil beside the pedestal. 10 inches down, the machine started shaking violently. The operator swore he felt the bucket push back as if it had hit something alive. Moments later, a sharp crack echoed through the air, and the hydraulic arm stopped abruptly mid-move. A thin stream of hydraulic fluid hissed onto the earth, pooling near the operator's boots. Work halted again. Tools were inspected and parts replaced, yet nothing in the system explained the sudden breakdown. By that time, rumors were spreading faster than the machinery. People whispered about the 3:33 a.m. dreams, the tolling bell, and the cold wind that never touched the village below. The fourth attempt failed before it even began. On Saturday morning, the crew had just secured the lift straps when the weather suddenly changed. No clouds, no signs. Just a sharp gust of wind that sent plans flying down the hill like startled birds. Helmets clattered on heads. Several workers stepped back from the statue, exclaiming that the wind felt colder than icy water. The foreman shouted, "Let us just finish this." They never received the opportunity. Without any thunder or even a hint of rainfall, a single lightning bolt struck the ground less than 15 feet from the statue's base. The noise was overwhelming and the light was blinding. One man dropped to his knees, covering his ears. Another fell backward, uninjured but pale. The foreman contacted the operator by radio and said, "Shut it down now." By that afternoon, the heavy machinery was being packed back onto trailers. The developers released a brief statement to the local newspaper mentioning unforeseen technical difficulties and promising to reevaluate safety procedures before continuing work. However, everyone on the hill that week understood the truth. Among the crew, no one wanted to attempt again. One crane operator requested a transfer out of state. A welder quit immediately, and yet the statue remained exactly as it had been. Arms outstretched, gaze lowered, the marble surface unmarred as if the steel cables had never touched her. The townspeople did not celebrate. There were no cheers or victorious speeches, only silent acknowledgments between neighbors and a few more candles left burning at her feet. One evening, Ruth Kelly walked the incline alone carrying a bouquet of lilies. She stopped a few feet from the base, knelt, and brushed dirt from the edge of the foundation. Then she whispered something inaudible to anyone else. Witnesses described her smile as subtle when she descended the hill. Whether this expression conveyed relief or served as a warning varied depending on who was asked. When reports began emerging from St. Mary's Creek, most media dismissed them as typical small-town drama, except for the Courier-Ledger. This regional publication in Louisville was respected for its feature stories focusing on human experiences. That was the moment Ethan Cole became involved. At 28 years old, Ethan was still viewed as the young talent in the newsroom. Intelligent, driven, but deeply skeptical, he had earned a reputation by debunking urban myths, haunted houses that were really just moldy buildings, and so-called miracle cures that turned out to be repackaged supplements. When his editor slid a slim file containing 3 printed emails and several cell phone photos of Rosary Hill across the desk, Ethan raised an eyebrow. "A statue they can't move," he said. "You want me to report on that?" The editor reclined and replied, "I want you to uncover the truth. Write it up and put the myth to rest. Isn't that your expertise?" On a Thursday afternoon, Ethan drove into town. Wearing a navy shirt with rolled-up sleeves, sunglasses hooked on his collar, and a camera bag on the front seat, he anticipated a quiet town desperately holding on to an outdated legend. What he encountered was even quieter and more somber than he had expected. The main street was lined with brick buildings, some shuttered, others still functioning. People moved slowly, their eyes frequently drifting toward the hill as though instinctively. The statue, visible from nearly 1/2 of a mile away, seemed to command the entire horizon. His initial interviews were courteous, yet cautious. At Tony's diner, a waitress named Carla served his coffee and answered his questions with fleeting smiles. She said, "You can write whatever you want, hun, but please do not make fun of her." At the grain cooperative, a retired farmer issued a similar caution saying, "Believe it or not, just do not mock the lady. That never turns out well." Nobody attempted to convince him of miracles or shoved photographs in his face. It felt as if the whole town had silently agreed their role was not to convert him, but rather to ensure he comprehended their unspoken boundaries. That first evening, Ethan checked into the town's only motel. He reviewed the footage he had captured of the hill from multiple angles. Around the 7th minute of the second reel, something flickered behind the statue. White, quick, almost like fabric catching the light. He paused the frame and zoomed in. It could have been a lens flare or simply nothing at all. Early the next morning, he climbed Rosary Hill by himself. The air was fresh and cool, the grass damp beneath his feet. Standing at the statue's base, he held a notebook and began recording observations. Weathered marble, faint chisel marks along the folds of the robe, and a hairline crack near the base that seemed deeper than expected. About halfway through sketching his notes, an elderly woman wearing a wool coat appeared beside him. She said, "You are the reporter, right?" Not asked. Ethan nodded. "What will you write about her?" she asked. Still figuring that out, he admitted. She. He observed him quietly for a long moment, then said, "Do not write to prove a point. Write to understand. The woman does not need defending. She needs to be understood." With that, she descended the hill without saying another word. That night, Ethan arranged a drone flight to get aerial footage of the statue. The weather conditions were ideal. Clear skies and gentle wind. However, just 15 seconds after takeoff, the live video suddenly froze. The battery indicator plunged from 86% to 0 in an instant, and the drone plummeted from the sky. When he retrieved it, nothing was damaged except for the strange fact that the battery now showed full. Ethan did not rest well that night. At 3:33 in the morning, a faint but deep sound awakened him, resembling a bell heard underwater. He approached the window. Rosary Hill was barely visible in the moonlight, yet the statue's shape was clear, standing there as it had for 70 years. By the fourth day, Ethan gave up trying to force the town's uneasiness into tidy journalistic categories. He continued taking notes and filming, but his focus shifted. His inquiries were less about the technical aspects of moving marble, and more about why nobody wanted it relocated. He found himself wandering the hill during late afternoons, lingering until twilight turned the surroundings a soft blue. Sometimes, others appeared there, lighting candles or placing flowers. At other times, it was only him with the statue. The doubt had not disappeared, but it was changing, replaced by a sensation he could not yet identify, a feeling that was growing quietly inside him. There was a sense that this place held more than just legends, and that the woman was more than mere stone. Whether he realized it or not, he was starting to feel as if he belonged to the unfolding tale. Carla, the diner waitress, was the one who directed James where to find her. "The last house on Willow Lane," she said while topping up his coffee. "White porch, rocking chair. If anyone holds the truth about the lady, it's Mrs. Martha Gray." Martha was 91 years old, her build delicate, yet her eyes steady and unwavering. She sat on that porch as if she were carved from the wood itself, wrapped in a hand-knit shawl, gazing at the hill the way some people watch the sea. When James showed up, she did not question his identity or purpose. Simply motioning to the vacant seat next to her, she said, "You want to know where she came from?" He nodded, understanding it was not a question. Martha's eyes drifted toward Rosary Hill, and for a long moment she remained silent. The breeze stirred the edge of her shawl. "It was the winter of '49, she started softly but distinctly. "Back then, St. Mary's Creek was bare. No paved streets, no grocery market, barely enough to fill the church on Sundays. But we had one another, and we had that hill. People said it was the highest spot in the county, and on clear days, you could see the river sparkling 30 miles away. That January, a storm arrived that should have swallowed us whole. Days filled with relentless rain, ice thick enough to break tree limbs, and wind that shrieked like it wanted to rip the sky apart. The river surged quickly as well. The storm was fierce and swift, and everyone was certain it would overflow within a few hours. Martha leaned forward a bit, her hands intertwined. Then suddenly it ceased. The wind changed direction, the water receded, and the storm moved to the east. The following morning you could walk to the town's edge and observe the path where the flood had been heading directly toward them before it veered away. She paused, allowing the recollection to linger between them. Many called it luck, but not Elaine O'Connor. Elaine and her husband Patrick were among the few Irish immigrant families in the area. Their son had just returned from the war, alive after being missing for several months. That very night when the storm changed, Elaine told anyone willing to listen that they owed a promise to the Blessed Mother. She declared, "If you protected our boy and spared our town, then we will keep you here forever." Soon enough, the promise turned into action. Without seeking permits or organizing fundraising, neighbors carried stones and timber up the hill. A stonemason named Carlo Mancini, unemployed and without options, accepted the work without pay. Martha described him softly as an artist who rarely spoke, but when he sculpted her face, it felt as if he already understood her. The statue was erected in spring. The entire town gathered at its base, men dressed in their best suits, women in dresses, and children clutching whatever flowers they found. Each family placed a single stone into the foundation, offering a piece of themselves beneath her feet. And then, when no one was paying attention, Elaine quietly slipped a folded piece of paper deep into the damp mortar. Martha Gray witnessed the act. She kept silent about its contents. For many decades, she remained quiet. Time went by. Crops failed one year and flourished the next. Children moved away to the cities. The church steeple was rebuilt twice. The lady stood firm through blizzards, heat waves, and hailstorms. She never appeared to wear down. Then one summer day, a corner of the foundation crumbled just enough to reveal the edge of something pale and fragile. Martha, already in her 70s, gently brushed away the dust. It was the paper, still folded and perfectly preserved. They did not open it immediately. It did not feel like the right moment, but Elaine, in her final days, requested it. The letter contained a simple message, a single sentence written in Elaine's careful handwriting. "If you save our town, we will keep you here forever." When James asked what became of the letter, Martha's lips curved into a soft smile. "It remains there, exactly where she placed it. You might not see it now, but you do not need to. The lady remembers." For a while, neither of them spoke. Down the street, a pickup truck rolled past the driver, lifting 2 fingers in greeting, without slowing down. Martha finally turned toward him. "You came searching for a story you could understand," she said. "But this one is not about understanding. It is about a promise. And promises like that are not easily broken." Ethan glanced toward Rosary Hill, where the statue caught the last rays of daylight. From where he sat, it felt complete. The statue appeared less like sculpted marble and more like a living presence. Listening closely, and for the very first time since his arrival, he felt uncertain about which version of the tale to trust. The directive arrived on a Monday morning, clear and administrative. It instructed to proceed with the relocation, stating, "No exceptions, no delays." By Thursday, Rosary Hill no longer resembled a quiet hilltop. Instead, it transformed into a preparation site. 3 cranes towered against the sky, their arms extending over the ridge resembling siege towers. Flatbed trucks filled the access road. Around 12 men wearing bright vests moved among coils of cable and piles of lumber, their radios crackling with bursts of static. This was the largest crew the town had ever witnessed. Experts had been brought in from Nashville and Chicago, specialists in moving lighthouses and relocating Civil War monuments. For these professionals, this was just another assignment. Yet for those watching from the base of the hill, it felt like an invasion. By 8 o'clock in the morning, a crowd had gathered. No one shouted or carried signs. They simply stood side by side, eyes locked on the summit where the white statue rose above the industrial machinery. The plan on paper was straightforward. The first step involved cutting into the foundation and detaching the base. The second step consisted of lifting the statue by crane onto a steel platform. The third step required loading it onto a reinforced flatbed for transport to its new, more accessible site near the highway. At 8:15, the first drill struck the foundation. At the foot of the hill, the noise was a consistent metallic whine, nearly swallowed by the breeze. However, up on the ridge, the men experienced it differently. A vibration that traveled up through their boots, as if the earth itself was resisting. By the time it was 8:20, the drill came to a halt. Not stuck, not broken, simply stopped. The bit refused to rotate, even though the motor was roaring at its maximum power. Mechanics swarmed the rig, murmuring about torque settings and electrical glitches. The foreman called in the second drill. It ran for 12 seconds before its bit snapped completely in half. The crowd down below shifted nervously. The foreman decided to move forward, hooking the crane directly to see if the statue could be moved without fully freeing the base. Heavy nylon straps were looped under the lady's outstretched arms and secured with steel shackles large enough to anchor a ship. From his operator's seat, a man named Hal gave the signal. The crane groaned as the straps tightened, and for the first time in more than 70 years, the statue shifted a fraction of an inch, perhaps 2. The crowd gasped, half in wonder, half in fear. Then came the wind. It was not a storm wind, no dark clouds appeared, no rain scent. It was a cold, biting gust from the west, sharp enough to sting exposed skin. The kind of wind that leaves a metallic taste in the air. House cursed inside his cabin. His controls flickered, the hydraulic pressure gauge dropping for no apparent reason. The crane trembled. The straps snapped. A slack sound like a deep, resonant gong rolled down the hillside. The workers froze. The crowd did too. It came again. 3 slow, deliberate tolls. No bell was present on that hill. Yet the noise was vivid enough to echo in the chest. Hal tried once more, pushing the controls forward. The crane arm raised about half a foot before every alarm on the dashboard lit up simultaneously. Overload, hydraulic failure, power surge. The engine stalled with a puff of dark smoke. The foreman shouted for the backup crane. Its operator barely managed to extend the boom before the radio clipped to his belt burst into a scream of static. He yanked it off. The case was burning hot. Then lightning struck. A single bolt, white, blue, and blinding, split the sky and crashed into the ground just over 3 meters from the statue. There had been no thunderclouds, no indication, just the sudden, precise strike. One of the men nearest the blast, an ironworker named James, was thrown backward. He hit the ground hard but stayed conscious, eyes wide open, claiming that in the moment before landing, he felt a small, warm hand on his chest. The foreman refused to attempt any more work. He commanded all machines to shut down and every man to leave the hill. Below, the crowd remained in stunned silence. Some made the sign of the cross. Others simply stared, as if trying to memorize the exact appearance of the statue at that moment. Unaffected, unscathed, her marble face calm beneath a sky that had immediately returned to peacefulness. Within an hour, the hilltop stood deserted except for the woman. The cranes, the trucks, the crews had all vanished, leaving behind deep tire tracks in the grass and a few discarded coils of cable resembling shed skin. By evening, the only noise was the soft whisper of rustling leaves. Candles started to appear at the base. 1, then 3, eventually forming a circle of flickering light around the pedestal. No one could say who had begun this vigil. Later that night, as the town slipped into an uneasy calm, an unexpected rain swept through. 15 minutes of steady silver sheets drenching the streets and glowing in the light cast by the hilltop candles. By morning, everything was dry again. The cables had disappeared and the cranes were taken away. The woman remained exactly where she had stood since the spring of 1949, arms outstretched, eyes lowered toward the town. The relocation project was never officially abandoned. The developers never released a formal announcement, yet the machinery never returned. Those present that day will tell you they witnessed a botched engineering effort. Nothing more. But ask others. The ones who heard the bell ringing, felt the chill of the wind, observed lightning striking under a clear blue sky, and they will say the woman on Rosary Hill made her message clear. It was not a refusal, but a warning. Do not attempt this again. After that last effort, the hill grew silent. Not the kind of silence you notice suddenly, but one that deepens gradually until you realize something essential is no longer there. There were no engines anymore, no more voices of men measuring and drilling, no steel cables twisting through the grass, only the gentle rustling of leaves in the maples, the soft crunch of boots belonging to those still climbing the slope, and the occasional whisper of a prayer. The developers did not hold a press conference. The city council made no official statement. The relocation date simply disappeared from the agenda, and the glossy advertisements for the Saint of Mary Spiritual Retreat and Resort began vanishing from shop windows one after another. For the townsfolk, that silence spoke louder than any formal announcement. In the weeks that came, life in St. Mary's Creek slowly returned to its pace, yet it was not the same as before. Those who had once advocated for the relocation no longer spoke of opportunity with the same conviction. Some avoided the subject entirely. Quietly, and without much notice, many joined the twilight walks up Rosary Hill. Ruth Kelly, who had brought lilies to the statue every Friday for several decades, observed a subtle but unmistakable change. More footsteps on the trail, coming not only from the older residents but also from young couples, teenagers, and even children holding their parents' hands. Some arrived carrying flowers, others came simply to spend a few moments standing beneath the open sky beside the lady. Even Ethan Cole transformed. The journalist who had arrived with a sharp, skeptical edge now held a small notebook filled not with exposés but lines that resembled prayers. He never openly claimed to believe in miracles. However, when asked why he remained in town weeks after his task was complete, he would simply reply, "Certain stories need more time to reach their conclusion." He began joining the evening meetings, not in the role of a reporter, but as another silent participant in the group. He lit candles, absorbed the gentle sound of hymns, and memorized the names of those whose lives had been influenced in various ways by the woman on the hill. Although the plan to move had been abandoned, Rosary Hill itself started to transform, not in its appearance, but in the attention it received. Volunteers leveled the dirt trail and covered it with gravel. A simple wooden table was placed at the foot of the statue for flowers and handwritten messages. No one claimed to have built it, yet everyone appreciated it. Even Martha Gray, now too fragile to climb the hill, insisted that her niece take her up once a month. She would rest on a folding chair at the base, her gaze fixed on the marble face. "It is not about winning," she said to Ethan one afternoon, her voice gentle against the breeze. "It is about honoring your promise." The dispute over the statue had split the town. But in the calm that followed, something else began to grow. The hill became less a mere landmark and more a symbol of renewed commitment. Not only the O'Connor family's pledge from 1949, but a communal understanding that some things are preserved not for profit, but because they hold sacred meaning. The lady remained in place, but people began to move. Visitors started to hear the tale, occasionally from local merchants, at other times from a stranger in the cafe. A small number of visitors came to see her. They did not arrive in large groups. Instead, they appeared in pairs and small family units, often departing as quietly as they had arrived. While some snapped pictures, many simply lingered in stillness, as if waiting for the sound of a bell to chime. One autumn evening just before dusk, the entire hillside seemed bathed in a radiant golden glow. The candles flickered gently, the maple leaves rustled softly, and the white marble reflected the final light of day. Ethan stood among the gathering, his camera resting untouched in its bag. In his journal, he wrote a simple phrase: "It is not that she could not be moved. It is that she should not be." Down in town, the council chamber remained silent on the topic of Rosary Hill. The developers never came back. The project documents were shelved, and over time, even the most eager individuals stopped bringing up the resort. For St. Mary's Creek, that was victory enough. For the lady on the hill, it became just another chapter in a long vigil spanning generations. Those who visit now rarely speak about lightning or wind or bells ringing mysteriously. Instead, they discuss the view from the summit, the peaceful quiet, and how if you stand there long enough, you might almost sense the town breathing beneath you. Perhaps that is the true miracle. Not a statue refusing to move, but a community choosing to remain. Pause and join her presence. So whenever you find yourself traveling along the quiet roads of Kentucky and notice a shimmer of white marble peeking above the treetops, pull your car to the side, take a moment to walk there, and stand quietly at her feet. You do not have to believe in miracles to grasp why she remains here. All you need is to open your heart and listen. If this tale touched you deeply, please give this video a like. Share it with someone who may need a glimpse of grace today. Also subscribe to Touched by Grace so you will not miss the next story where faith, mystery, and the human spirit come together.